You're listening to the Hayek Program Podcast. This podcast includes audio from lectures, interviews, and discussions from scholars and visitors of the F.A. Hayek Program for Advanced Study in Philosophy, Politics, and Economics at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. To learn more about the Hayek Program, visit hayek.mercatus.org. To learn about graduate student fellowship opportunities with the Mercatus Center at George Mason University for students at Mason as well as at universities across the globe, please visit students.mercatus.org.
It is my honor to introduce our next keynote speaker, Dr. Dave Schmidtz. David Schmidtz is the Presidential Chair of Moral Science at West Virginia University's Chamber College of Business and Economics. He's the editor-in-chief of the journal Social Philosophy and Policy, and very lucky for us, a distinguished affiliated fellow with the Hayek Program at the Mercatus Center at George Mason University. Before going to WVU, he was the Kendrick Professor of Philosophy and Eller Chair of Service-Dominant Logic at the University of Arizona, where he founded the Department of Political Economy and Moral Science. His most recent books are Living Together, Inventing Moral Science, and Debating Education, Is There a Role for Markets, with Harry Brighouse, both with Oxford University Press. Schmidt's work explores the morality of markets in theory and in practice. By looking at education, environmental issues, and social welfare, he grounds his approach to academia and observation, matching it with the pressing issues of the real world in the tradition of Adam Smith, David Hume, and others. He's a prolific and influential scholar and an exemplar of the interdisciplinary approach we aim to cultivate here at Markets and Society. It's my immense pleasure to have Dave come up and speak with us this afternoon. The floor is yours.
Thanks for coming. Thanks for being here and for staying. I know it's Sunday afternoon, so you folks have other places to be. So I appreciate the chance to talk to you. Self-governance. This is about making decisions, how to live, how to understand, articulate, and pursue a mission, how to really mean it, and when to change it. In economics, a well-defined decision problem is a task of maximizing utility with respect to a budget constraint, which is, pretty simple in theory, but in practice, our world doesn't actually give us substantial enough constraints to make our decision problems well-defined. Our normal human reality is we make somewhat arbitrary decisions about how to partition our life into episodes. When we operate under a particular budget constraint, typically that'll be downstream from having decided to operate under it. Even more interesting, that prior task of choosing budgets is not itself a well-defined rational choice problem. Instead, it's our way of building a framework by reference to which subsequent decision problems may become well-defined. So if I'm looking for lodging, I don't infer from my life expectancy of 20 years that I only have 20 years to find a place. Neither do I treat my net worth as the limit to how much I can spend on lodging. Constraints like that are from the world. And what comes from the world typically, is not constraining enough to be what humanly rational choice needs. Humanly rational choice is a choice within a context of having other things to do and other things to decide. It's choice within a compartment that we choose to regard as an episode in our lives as decision makers. So my time budget is defined not by my life expectancy, but by considerations like where I want to be at 9 a.m. on Monday, my first day on the new job. To be constrained only by the world sometimes would look like mental illness. So if my night at the casino were constrained by my net worth and my borrowing power, that would make me a gambling addict rather than a person setting up for entertainment at the casino. Because we don't want to burn through our life savings in one night, we impose a limit, a spending allowance for the night. Life doesn't decide that I can't spend next month's rent on the next gamble. I decide that if I'm rational. Gambling addicts might talk themselves out of their chosen budget, but humanly rational choice sometimes is partly about not creating decision-making nodes where decision-making nodes shouldn't be. I already drew a line. I had to make a decision tonight and did in fact make it, and so I had some fun tonight, but my night at the casino is done. Treating myself as having another decision to make now would imply a loss of self-control. So my task of aiming to buy a house might be constrained by my decision to treat a house as a monthly negative cash flow that shouldn't exceed a third of my projected net monthly income. But budgets aren't the only limit on our pursuits. Another limit is a search can come to an end not because we hit the limit of our budget, but because we found what we were looking for, and there's no reason to keep looking for it. So having a clear enough picture of our target, that can help us understand when we've hit it, and thus when a project of hitting it comes to a close for that reason. So, and we have experience with this, but oddly little theory. So suppose I decide that I need a screwdriver. When my search turns up a screwdriver, well, two things can happen. If I'm optimizing, I might ask, is this the best screwdriver I can find within the time limit I set myself for finding one? Or if I'm satisficing, I ask a different question like, well, will this do? And if the answer is yes, I stop looking. I could try to translate the second question into the first question and reinterpret will this do as shorthand for is settling on this optimal, or do I have time to keep looking? But in practice, I don't delude myself into thinking that satisficing needs translating into the vocabulary of optimizing so that I can count it as rational. No purpose would be served. We create compartments in our lives, spaces for making particular decisions within particular constraints where life itself isn't constraining enough to be a good enough handle on the fact that life hits us as a series of episodes, where part of the challenge posed by any given episode is to bring it to a close and get on with the next one. Details often are somewhat arbitrary, because what's not arbitrary is that we need self-imposed limits that leave us room to get on with other things. Challenges of corporate self-governance are a bit like challenges of individual self-governance. The world imposes limits on us, and yet we still have to decide whether to take on debt. We decide whether to defer maintenance. We decide how to manage cash flow challenges. While we can nicely define a corporate mission, picking a mission will still be picking rather than a well-defined rational choice problem. There will be limits, but within parameters, many possible targets will make sense. We don't get a mission by calculating. We get it by picking. Individuals face something like a principal-agent problem, insofar as individual agents decide how to practice the self-restraint that is at the heart of individual sanity. The person you are this evening, maybe at the casino, has to decide what kind of life to turn over to the person you will be when you wake up tomorrow morning. Should we see this as a principal-agent problem? Well, it depends on whether anything is illuminated by seeing it that way, and I think sometimes it is. Sometimes it helps us laugh at ourselves, if nothing else. But managing principal-agent problems clearly is part of collective self-governance. A corporation needs to know itself, and that includes understanding that the individual decision makers who make up the corporation may not buy into its corporate mission without reservation. So what set of incentives and opportunities and exercises in moral education could channel individual behavior in ways that serve the corporate mission? How does crafting a mission statement serve a corporate mission? Well, a business needs to decide how to make dealing with it safe for customers and for staff. A state likewise has to decide how to make citizens safe from other people, including those people who, for reasons of their own, want to do whatever it takes to acquire state power. So Friday, Paul was discussing the public choice school of political economy, which ostensibly has a cynical view of government employees as creatures driven by self-interest. To me, and I think Paul feels the same way, that's not it. Public choice school's insight is not that politicians are selfish maximizers, but simply that politicians are agents. So it's more interesting than that. It's less cynical and more interesting than that. Failing to heed this insight, academics theorize about what governance structures ought to do, but fundamental fact, governance structures aren't decision makers. They're arenas of decision making. I think right about the time I came up with that word, I read a manuscript by Hayek Program using the same word, so I think we're on the same track there. Within those arenas, emerging results are emerging from contests among individual decision makers. And the results that emerge from these contests aren't what it's like thinking that what final score should players of a game choose? Well, they don't get to choose that. It emerges from the contestation, and that's what politics is like. The results are not what any individual player would have decided. A corporate agent survives by generating positive cash flow. It's not actually profit, it's cash flow. But a corporation needs more of a plan than that. A corporation needs to decide how it will make money. It's like the profit motive is the genotype, but there has to be a phenotypic manifestation of the genotype. So a corporation needs to know, much as any individual social being needs to know, how it intends to be of service. A purpose is a compass. It orients us toward acting in one way rather than another. Corporations need a compass, I think, more or less as individual agents do. And the point isn't that there's a particular purpose they should have. Rather, the point is to exhibit purposiveness per se. We pick our purpose partly for the sake of being purposive. And so this, too, isn't so much a well-defined problem so much as picking a frame of reference that can make subsequent problems well-defined, much like choosing constraints within which optima become definable. So a state likewise needs to know what kind of life form it intends to operate in service of. Who's the principal? Who's the agent? Are citizens property of a monarch? Or are they individual sovereigns and thus ends in themselves? Are they equal citizens? What rights and privileges would be implied by that? When are citizens analogous to customers? When are they analogous to employees? And I suppose some of these are questions for a university too. What is self-governance for a university? Some of a university's officers decide what the university's objective is, and then they or other officers administer with that objective in mind. So how does a university propose to be of service? What principle is a university an agent of? I'm going to look at 4 answers. One answer is that university students are its customers, and providing students with a teaching faculty is a university's main way of being of service. Behind the scenes, there will be research and development, but on this model, the ultimate objective of research is to ramp up the quality of service provided to students by exposing students to a cutting edge of new knowledge. There's a tension here. Insofar as the client is our student, the fact that we serve them as teachers entails duties not only to what our students are, but to what they can become. Of course, it's imperative to make students feel physically safe on campus, but if we assure them, even by accident, that they don't need to grow, we are failing them. And that may never show up on their transcript, and it may never occur to them to care about that, but it will come back to bite them. So in passing, I have a story about the subtleties of safe space. I had a student who wrote an editorial for the student newspaper. This was decades ago, where she said, Yale women are being invited to parties and where men are spiking their drinks with sedatives and after they pass out, raping them. So we need courts and police to protect us. But the first thing we need is to protect ourselves. So if you go to a party and somebody hands you a drink that might be spiked, don't drink it. 3 decades later, that editorial was excavated and treated as a reason not to confirm her as Brett Kavanaugh's replacement on the DC circuit. And so back when she was a student, she thought she was safe in her dorm writing an editorial for the student newspaper, and 3 decades later, it turns out she wasn't. Now, a lesson, maybe, you can take a lot of things from that, but I would say if students can't say something that might seem in some ways immature, regrettable in retrospect, but at the moment seems like helpful common sense, then we're making it unsafe for them to experiment with thinking for themselves. We can make campuses safe, but making her safe from the temptation to think for herself, we have no right to do that. We have to teach students that the adults they're becoming might get hurt by words and deeds of the students they presently are. The world isn't safe, it just isn't. And we have a duty not to misrepresent the world as safer than it is. But even so, students can't live in fear. They can't live in fear of what they might say or what other people might say or how anachronistic that might seem 3 decades from now when it just seems like common sense at the moment. At some point, though, we need to put that first answer, in the context of a second one, which is that a university is a community within a larger community, and that larger community is the university's ultimate customer. Universities provide communities with an expanding base of knowledge and with a population of graduates, hopefully trained to run with that knowledge. A third answer would be, the client that a university serves is the truth itself, knowledge for its own sake. If we care about the university at all, we want it to be noble enough for this answer to have some plausibility. And of course, it isn't good enough to defend what one does as pure research. There are an infinite number of truths, most of them aren't worth saying. So we need criteria of relevance, presumably some version of this previous communitarian answer, something that tells us which truths are worth knowing. But still, we want to have enough faith in the truth to want to get to the truth, even if it is uncomfortable. Maybe a university is an agent of the truth, and most of us at least hope to work in service of the truth. But I don't see the truth as a customer or a consumer of our product. We have some kind of duty to be agents of truth, but that duty isn't to a principle. The truth is our product, not our principle. Fourth answer would be a university's client is its faculty. And a university is, in some respects, a club, and suppose it's a club of truth seekers. The faculty are the club's members, so it's easy to imagine an actual club coming together for that purpose. I imagine the Royal Society of London forming in the late 1600s. And I would say faculty are supposed to be, though, more than anyone, providers rather than consumers of a university's product. So the Royal Society, that's legitimate. Faculty clubs, presumably in general, legitimate. But that's not how universities market themselves. It's not how a university wants to be perceived. So even granting that there's some merit in treating spectacular visionaries, right, like Newton, Boyle, Bacon, right, as principles whose fruitfulness justifies universities being their agents, one thing a university cannot be justified as is a means to the end of empowering pedestrian faculty to be pedestrian. So far as I can see, that takes us back to the first two answers, which concerned our taking our principle to be our students and or our broader community. So another point that seems to me that survives exporting from the individual to the collective context is that good governance is mission-driven governance. When we talk about how a mission is supposed to provide a framework of criteria for effective university governance, I don't suppose we're in the realm of theorems or even proofs or even well-defined questions. Again, a purpose is a compass. I'm a philosopher, so I'm paid to be a lover of wisdom. I'm not paid to represent myself as an exemplar of wisdom. That would be a recipe for extreme embarrassment. But I am here to maybe offer a few nuggets that will inspire you to see something differently or have a better handle on something that you come across in your dealings with administrators and so on. So a purpose is a compass. Your mission should help you evaluate new information as it comes in. Your mission can tell you that the new information is relevant, and indeed the new information supports changing your plan. But you need to know what to expect before you can know enough to find new information surprising. So what goes wrong? I'd say a mission statement initially will be a compromise among original framers of that institution's mission statement. And so there'll be consensus building among framers who represent diverse constituencies. That's an ideal of a kind, but if it were a flavor, it would be vanilla, right? Consensus building results in platitudes designed to be innocuous and therefore objectionable to no one. I don't know what alternative process would culminate in a decisive mission statement that truly specifies a concrete mission. And successive generations of administrators are going to need to represent diverse constituencies anyway. So there is something to be said for having a founding mission with enough plasticity that future administrators can make it work for them. But in passing, note that a university's mission and underlying purposiveness will need to be seen as a flow, not a stock, to borrow some accounting terminology. A university ideally would endure as an entity with a mission. So a university's very purposiveness is part of what it provides for a larger community. The purpose isn't to land on Mars or to cure that version of cancer. It's to be a crucible from which outcomes like that are an ongoing flow. The purpose we found yesterday may or may not carry over. I'm grateful for the opportunity to give this lecture. But the way in which it serves my purposes isn't a truth about the arc of my whole life. It's today's purpose, and it makes life meaningful today. But it can't continue to be my purpose. Or if you think, I don't know if you've ever taught an Olympic athlete or maybe been one, but there comes a day when the event has happened and you won the medal or you didn't, and you're going to get up the next morning and there isn't going to be anything for you to do, and that's going to be a crisis in your life. So the thing that can save you is an abiding, steady flow of purposiveness that's at the heart of healthy self-governance. And so I say this especially thinking of us as members of university communities. We succeed as social animals by specializing. Our goals aren't hardwired, but the propensity to develop them is. We find ways to be of service, and they thereby build estimable places for ourselves in a community. This is what I got from Adam Smith, is to say, okay, there's self-interest, and then there's regard for others. And how are we going to bridge that gap between them? Well, there is a gap, but it's not what you think. I mean, the self that we're interested in is a self that is interested in living a life that means something to the people around us, in what it means to the people around us. You know that. Even if your theory doesn't know that, you know that. It's not this unbridgeable gap. It's eminently a bridgeable. It's a gap. It really is a gap, but it's a bridgeable gap. It's a gap that episodes pry apart and other episodes allow you to rebuild a unity in your life. A community needs to develop reservoirs of capacity, and that's at the heart of a university's mission. And that needs to be the focus of a university's governance. We are capable of shaping ourselves into buggy whip manufacturers, key punch operators. And that capacity survives as a feature of a genotype that doesn't code for buggy whip maker or key punch operator as a specific phenotype. Instead, it codes for an underlying plastic capacity to take the shape that our community needs us to take in a particular time and place. Right? We're social beings. We're self-interested. We are not hermits. Our interest is not the interest of a hermit. It's the interest of a being for whom the currency of a life well lived is the esteem that other people have for us, and our looking in the mirror and knowing that the esteem that other people have for us isn't a case of mistaken identity. We really did do what they admire us for doing. That's the fruition. That's when we have lived a life worth living. So capacities that endure are those that can express phenotypically in multiple skill sets. Could be, a key punch operator, porter, cellist, whatever the circumstances make available to us as options and make attractive to us as options, make it seem like, if I was good at that, first of all, I can be good at that. And if I was good at that, people would want to do business with me. And then when they did business with me, they would look at me and say, hey, I hope we can call on you again someday, because when we called on you, we came to the right person, and we get that. That's what you want. If we aren't plastic in that way, then the next big change will be an extinction event. So in a rapidly changing world, any hardwired purpose is an over-specialization that's just around the corner from an existentialist crisis. So universities have to be maintaining reservoirs of plasticity rather than producing tokens of fine-grained adaptation. Specialization is good, but the academy specializes in producing something that is not itself a specialization. So we need a better sense of what to count as over-specialization. And I think nobody who knows me would think that I have any complaint, and I don't think I have any complaint. But imagine one department studying what's conducive to productivity, and another department studying how to distribute the fruits of our productivity. And imagine that we'll call that philosophy, and that's in the College of Humanities. We'll call this economics and put that in the college. So these people never even meet each other, the people who study productivity and the people who study how products should get distributed. How did that happen? Well, there's a story about how these other departments proliferated in the 1800s. But to cut to the chase and talk about something that you probably have experienced, if you understand the wonder of specialization, and you see things, wow, there's Basket Masters, well, there's Adidas, well, there's Puma, there's Nike, now we're talking. And then you say, yeah, but I can take specialization for the next level. I am going to produce sneakers for the left foot. Now, that's a joke, right? The market would tell you instantly that you're over-specialized. You have no customers. You shut down. Or figure out what you did wrong and come back, try something else. If you are an academic, you submit your stuff to the journals, and then maybe there are 6 left-foot cobblers in the world. At market, your paper gets sent to 2 of them, and they say, yeah, I think this should be published because there's no demand for it. Nobody wants to read this. There's 6 of us in the world who think this is good, and our way of life is going to go extinct if we don't find somebody else and start publishing somebody else. So yes, we think this should be published. So it gets published because there's no demand for it. Yeah, I don't know. Is it really hard to publish? Is it really easy to publish? I don't even know anymore. But I don't think my experience is of any relevance, but I think I might say it's harder than ever to publish stuff that should be published, but it's easier than ever to publish what shouldn't be published. So I just don't know. I don't know. I'm getting too close to whining, but anyway, over-specialization of our reviewers desensitizes us and our fields to pointlessness. It turns siloed departments into echo chambers. So what would it be like to get out of the corners into which we paint ourselves with academic over-specialization? I don't know whether anybody's focusing on these questions when they talk about mission-driven governance. I think it's not high-mindedness. It's just simple, pragmatic realism to say that university's mission is to be something other than a vocational school that teaches task-specific skill sets. Obviously, some institutions, we want them to be coding for specific training, specific vocations, but part of a university's point is that the usefulness of task-specific skill sets tends to have an expiry date. Enduring usefulness implies a capacity to acquire whatever new task-specific skill set will be called on by the new challenge that's just around the corner. So to be wired to find a specialty, that's to be wired to be creative. But what we see in the academy, and I don't mean this as a complaint at all, just a fact, what we see in the academy is creativity at the margin. Faculty and students alike aspire to be a little bit different from the people around us. We want the people around us to see our departure as indicating creative flair. They will celebrate our departure if it complements what they brought to the table, but not if it renders what they brought obsolete. So being humanly creative in the way that universities encourage is all about making room for ourselves to fit in. Creativity is perceived and appreciated at the margin. It's measured in terms of next steps, not quantum leaps. But just to state the obvious now, the respect that we need to show for what's already on the table, that has a downside. We're wired to trust people. We assume walking in their footsteps is worthwhile, and often it is. It's part of being a social animal. We join the club by trusting people and believing what they say. That makes it terrifying when scholarship becomes a team sport. When people start choosing sides and wearing team colors, they start aiming to win and not to deserve to win. They start booing the other team, and that's when the academy stops being a noble place. When a belief becomes a condition of membership in a tribe, the academy begins to rot. We do need to censor ourselves because having a point is about seeing what needs saying, not blurting out truth like someone with Tourette's syndrome. The project of pursuing truth has to respond to the human condition in a dignified, diplomatic, sensitive, constructive way. But it does matter that people are wired to be tribal. If your diversity statement is identical to everyone else's diversity statement, then no matter what it literally says, it does not express a commitment to diversity. After all the mission stating is done, questions inevitably remain about which way the wind is blowing and what would make it reasonable to expect administrators to know when to resist it. So, yeah, sometimes it seems to me that universities, sometimes, not so much day to day, but when I read the newspapers or Chronicle of Higher Education, it seems like universities have become places where truth isn't so much pursued as terrorized. When we evolved flexible capacities to answer questions and to find a way to fit in, a capacity to wonder what's the point came with the territory. We evolved into creatures with massive abilities to process, evaluate, and adjust to incoming information. We don't always have time to think, but when we do have time to wonder what's the point, that's when we really start needing answers. So when this life is done, what will be the point of having lived it? Will you know what you stood for, what you fought for? Will you know that it was worth fighting for, even if the members of your team thought you should be cut for having said such an outrageous thing? So we evolved into creatures with massive abilities to process, evaluate, adjust. We'd start needing answers. Not all capacities are pro-survival. This is a capacity to what's the point? That's a capacity that's not pro-survival. It was not selected for. It came as part of a package deal, and it's the package deal that got selected for. We have a capacity for self-doubt. It comes with the territory of pro-survival flexibility. It comes with our pro-survival capacity to be creative and to think, I think there's something else out there. It's not a mistake for a university to nurture that capacity for possibly dangerous self-doubt. Part of a university's purpose is to help people, young people, know they aren't alone when they wonder why they're here. Sometimes wisdom can be articulated and sometimes it can be shared. We've made mistakes in how we teach ethics. Ironically, the fact that we're inept at teaching ethics seems to me to be fueling a sense that universities should be doing more to teach ethics. Philosophy has gone through a period of teaching that moral theory is a search for, in effect, a recipe, and that's not ancient. It's like maybe a century, maybe less than that. Today's moral jingles, moral theories, are jingles. They're slogans from which we're supposed to be able to deduce what to do. Theories seem designed today to tell us what to do, but they're useless for that purpose. There's hardly anyone you know, even professional philosophers, who has ever actually used an ethical theory to make a real decision. What's up with that? So what are philosophers supposed to do when they get recruited to teach applied ethics classes such as business ethics? Administrators who hire them have, a vague idea anyway that students should learn the ethics to see the ethical dimensions of business decisions. Philosophers weren't taught anything about that, and they know it. So they deflect and redirect conversation back to familiar turf. They develop case studies, right? Here's what business students need to know. Okay, if there's a runaway trolley on a track, right? Or if you woke up one morning to find yourself hooked up on an ivy to a famous violinist, okay, we need to know. So they develop case studies that are imaginary so that they can't be fact-checked. And they test students with exam questions like, what does the utilitarian say here? And my life changed one day when I was teaching 21 post-Soviet professors. And I said, so what does the utilitarian say here about the trolley problem? And the students said, well, there must be something you can do. Like you can yell out a warning, right? There's some other way of stopping the trolley. There's some other way of rerouting it. There's something you can do. And I said, no, come on, get with the program. Pay attention here. The question is 1 or 5. This is not rocket. 1 or 5. Which number is bigger, 1 or 5? And they said, we need a time out. We need to talk about this. Because their native language was Russian. They all had Russian in common. And so they said, yeah, we need time out to talk this over. So they talked to each other in Russian. And then they came back and said, yeah, they had a spokesman. They said, yeah, we understand this problem. We actually have heard it many times before. We get it that the few have to be sacrificed for the sake of the many. That's what we were taught. But what we were taught was a lie. It was always true that there was another way. And I said, okay, I'll never teach the trolley problem again. And I haven't. So philosophers weren't taught like business schools imagine they should have accumulated some wisdom so they go to familiar turf. They ask, what does the utilitarian say here? And so the teacher ends up asking students to show proficiency in the use of a technical term. Not good enough. Questions about how to understand a toy theory. Not good enough. We also teach that the true ethical theory would enable you to be certain. You wouldn't have to go to bed at night wondering if you did the right thing. You'd say, hey, there was the code. I'm in compliance. The deal's done. We need to teach that life is not like that. No map, no moral code relieves you of responsibility for figuring out what your destination is. Some codes encode wisdom, but there's no such thing as a code you can simply follow. Even the best map's point is to minimize rather than eliminate the risk of ignorantly making a wrong turn. Part of adult responsibility is making choices for reasons that are not compelling and not pretending otherwise. Our fundamentally, characteristically human purpose is to invent a purpose, and to invent a purpose that feels so right that it feels like discovering a purpose. And sometimes a goal feels that right. Sometimes it takes work. Sometimes we make it right as we grow into it. Or sometimes we choose a path that really doesn't fit us, and then we make matters worse by hiding our mistake from ourselves. A more generic mistake implicit in our system of education is that we accidentally teach students to treat our courses as games where a student's goal is to read the instructor's mind and say whatever the instructor wants to hear. But of course, learning to say whatever a teacher gives points for, that doesn't prepare a student to live a life. And above all, it doesn't prepare students for those moments when they will make the decisions that will define them. So if I could ask a university to teach students one thing, that's the one thing that I would ask. And if it succeeded, I would feel like the university was what the world needed it to be. The lesson is, a life is a novel. You only get to write one. You can't be Superman. You can't be the person who never makes mistakes, but you can be the person who honestly admits them, corrects them as best you can, and gets up tomorrow morning ready to give life another shot and believing that you'll do better today. There is such a thing as humanly heroic. Heroes don't live forever, but neither do cowards. And when it's all over, you have to know that your question will be, did you make yours a story about a life worth living? Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Hayek Program Podcast. To learn more about the research, scholars, and work of the Hayek Program, visit hayek.mercatus.org. For more information about graduate student fellowship opportunities for students at Mason as well as at universities across the globe, please visit students.mercatus.org. We hope you recommend students to our programs or consider applying yourself.